Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today we're going to be building up a fleet. But not just any old fleet, because it's the Star Trek Armada. Star Trek Armada was developed and published by Activision and was released for Windows in the year 2000. And if the name and the box art didn't give away the game type, it becomes very clear on the back. This is an RTS, a real-time strategy. And one that required a reasonable spec at the time. A 200MHz Pentium 2, 32MB of RAM, 700MB of storage space, and you really wanted a decent graphics card. Inside the box we get something very cool. It's a limited edition Star Trek The Next Generation customizable card game card. This is the Akira class, which didn't show up in the original run of the game, as it was only based on the TV series. And for someone like me, who collected the cards while I was at school, this is amazing, even if I'll never get to use it. The game itself came on a single CD. We also get a 112-page manual, which is quite chunky when all of this is in English. I'm not sure all this detail was needed, but it is always nice to have anyway. The game starts off with a video that is mostly clips from the various cutscenes, and it's more like a trailer than an actual intro. But eventually we get into the main menu, which is this nice animated affair that gives us some very limited options for configuring the game, as it's mostly about letting you select between the multiplayer and the single player game. And selecting that, we can see we have 4 chapters of the game to play, which you have to do in order. So we start with the Federation.
Captain's log, stardate 53550.8. With the Dominion War over and matters stabilizing in the Alpha Quadrant, the Enterprise is helping to re-establish an outpost in the Barisa sector.
Unsurprisingly, the first few missions are mostly tutorial. And while setting up a new base and defending against some rogue Jem'Hadar, a time ship, yes, we had to have some timey-wimey plots here, arrives from the future to warn us of a Borg invasion that will take over the Federation. But before we can deal with that, we'll have to go kick off one of the other subplots, as Worf gets his own hero ship, this time a Defiant class, and he gets to go and deal with some sonar. You remember them, the race from Star Trek Insurrection, and this level is teaching you all about base building. That makes it, I think, the best time to talk about the resource system in the game, as there's 3 main types that you can see in the top right hand corner. There's dilithium, which has to be mined from the moons, and this requires a mining station and ships, and you can have multiple ships per station. And so far so standard RTS, but the other 2 are a bit more interesting. As the next one is crew, as every single ship requires crewmates to operate. And when they're built, this will come out of the global pool that you can see. And that will slowly regenerate based on the number of stations that you have. But there's also officers, and this sort of acts like a unit cap, as it limits how many officers that you can have active. You can increase this through research, but that will cost you more dilithium, so you will have to keep an eye on it. And we learn more about the other uses of the crew in the next mission, because it's one of those favourites of Command & Conquer, the running away with limited units, or in this instance a single one, which is Worf. And I couldn't be a Trekkie if I didn't mention the cannon-breaking nature of this level, as there's lots of stable looking wormholes that you'll use to get around the map. It seems that after the only known one being at DS9, they just started springing up everywhere. The prophets be praised. And after a bit of hide and seek using the Nebulas, which we will talk about a bit later, you will find a derelict spaceship. Now, unlike other RTS games, they don't automatically become yours. Instead, you have to transport crew to that ship to take it over. This does mean you'll start spreading your crew a little thin, and in this level it can get even thinner as there are a few vessels that you can try and take over. But you will want to make sure you have a minimum amount on your craft, as there is a space station that you can take over, and then once you get it up and running you can then easily recrew from the general pool. But until you have that station you can't do that.
Armed and ready.
You can even take over ships that aren't derelicts. All you gotta do is knock out their shields and then transport over enough people. Now each race has different proficiencies at this, so some will find it easier than others. It's a neat system that brings in some extra strategy into the game. And it's also something that unsurprisingly the Borg are very good at doing, with ships designed to assimilate and take over the crew and a ship.
Acknowledged, Starfleet.
And it seems the Borg aren't too far away because we have to fight them in the very first of the Klingon missions. The Borg do act a little bit differently in the game compared to the TV series, as well they needed to be gamified a little bit. And because of this they will attack you in a number of waves, which makes building up your own forces as well as defences very important. And there's two main types of defensive weapons per race, energy and torpedoes. Although in the first Klingon missions you only get access to the disruptor cannons, you'll have to wait to get those torpedo launchers. And one interesting thing to note is that phasers or disruptors will tend to hit with every shot, but they won't do as much damage as the torpedo launchers, which can miss faster ships. But in another nice touch, all the star bases have their own defense systems, so they can pick off those smaller ships with ease. You can form fleets like any other RTS game at this point, with using the control and a number key. But unlike most of them, you are limited with how many ships that you can have in said fleet, and consequently how many ships you can select at once, which turns out to be 8. And I feel this is mostly down to the UI, as the game likes to show info on every single ship that you have selected, so you can at a glance see how their shield status is going along with their crewing levels, and well, the special meter, and just generally what their health is like. This does make things a little bit harder for those like me that likes to build huge fleets. I still can, but I have to spread it across multiple keys.
A battle has begun. Ready for battle!
And this wouldn't be a Star Trek game without the Klingons having some form of civil war, as one of the houses thinks it should be ruling the Empire, and ends up working with the Romulans.
My apologies, Chancellor, but I had pressing business to attend to.
Which leads on to this fun little mission, as you have this small base in the middle of the map, with a bunch of sensors spread across the map, and you have to wait for Worf to arrive with the Sword of Kahless. And while waiting and trying to fortify your position, those sensors will get snuffed out one at a time, and the fog of war will start to creep in on you. It's all nicely done, and it shows that each of the races will have their own different styles of missions. And one of the things I actually found quite fun is that they'll send a few Negvar class ships to attack you, and you're not in the position to be able to build them yourself. But if you're really quick, you can drop their shields, then start to transport crew over from your main star bases. And seeing those bases have more or less unlimited crew, it's not too hard to take them over and bring them over to your side, giving you a few powerful ships for that last final push.
The day will be ours!
Enemy engaged.
Our base is under attack!
The next mission is your bread and butter style RTS, it's go and destroy a base. But one downside of these space-based games is the maps tend to be a little bit simpler. Even though it's really just 2D, and the ships really only move up and down if they want to try and get around a vessel, which they don't always do very well, but you are still limited with what you can use to design the map. Which means there'll be a lot of asteroid belts and nebulas, with asteroids pretty much being static walls, though there are a few that will move around on other maps, and then you have the nebulas, which are far more interesting, as you can travel through them, but you might not want to. Green ones are good because they will repair your shields, which is great if you need a quick top up in one of those limited unit missions. The red ones will slow you down and drain your shields. These should be avoided, as they won't leave your ship in a great shape to fight when you leave them. Blue ones can be useful as they take out shields and weapons, even those fired from outside into them, which makes them a great place to hide away from the enemy. Yellows should be avoided at all costs, as they destroy the life support systems on a vessel, and thus it will slowly start to kill off the crew, and if they all die, then that ship is then abandoned. And finally, there's the purple ones, which are also known as the Mutara Nebulas. And if you know your Trek, you'll know that it'll slow you down and disable your shields, but on top of that, it'll also take out your sensors. These get used to try and block off areas that the designer doesn't want you to go to, but every so often you can use them as a shortcut if you're feeling a little bit brave.
A new station is complete.
There are also black holes, that for the most part are just sitting there and something that the ships will fly around. The last of the Klingon missions has you building a base from scratch, as you have to take on the Romulans. And I think this is a good time to talk about the base building, as it's relatively simple, and more or less the same for every single race. You have your star bases and the dilithium mining station, which we've already touched on, but there aren't any energy production or silos required in the game. We also have the two main defensive weapons, which we talked about. Shipbuilding is done via 3 different buildings, well, depending on the race. You have the smaller, larger, and then the super weapons. The shipyards also provide repair and recrew abilities to ships, and all of which have various dependencies that aren't too complex to follow. Possibly one of the more annoying ones is that you need to have a research base to be able to build the larger shipyards, as you might not even use the upgrades that they provide. The first research post allows you to get an upgrade for each of your main craft, and the second one provides upgrades for the special ship that every race gets. And for the most part, this is it. Everything gets built via the construction ship, so you can go and place them pretty much anywhere on the map, though at times the constructor will just get in the way of where it's meant to place it and will tell you it can't be built. And it can take a little while for them to construct it, and you can't join together multiple construction craft to speed something up, so don't expect any defences to come online very quickly. After this we come on to the Romulan missions, and these are sort of what you might expect.
Our alliance with Toral in this Klingon war has proven to be more trouble than it's worth. In the last Klingon raid, one of our top scientists, Dr. Oldan, was captured.
Right away we have to use the cloaking device to sneak into a Klingon base, and then use one of the ship's special attacks to then get a spy onto said base.
Where to? I'm inside. This place is more heavily guarded than I thought. I'm gonna try to disable their defense systems. Prepare an attack force.
Now more or less every single ship in the game has a special ability, which you get from the research facility like I mentioned, and there are quite a range of them. One of them will help you detect cloaked vessels, and the Klingons will get mostly destructive attacks. And in this instance, the Warbird will get a shield draining one, that if you have a fleet of them, can suck the shields dry of almost any station in no time at all. The downside is you can't just spam these, they have their own energy bar, and they'll slowly tick up over time, and how often you can use them will depend on each individual ability. The next mission has something quite interesting, as you have to deal with both Cardassians and Ferengi, because, well, they just got out and found themselves an Omega particle. Yep, that's right, the writers really went crawling through those Voyager episodes to find a MacGuffin. And first of all, you'll have to defend yourself against both races, as for some reason they're not happy you're there and will just continuously attack you.
ready to work.
But at one point during this mission, the Ferengi will make you an offer. Give them 2 ships of dilithium, and they'll form an alliance with you.
Admiral, incoming transmission.
It was wise of you to take us up on this offer. We look forward to doing business with you in the future.
And this makes the rest of this mission very easy, as they are the ones who are protecting Omega. And capturing it and getting it to your base is the only goal here. You don't have to destroy anyone. But in doing so, you will rile up the Borg. Yes, they had to make a return.
Relinquish Particle 010 and prepare to be assimilated.
And this leads on to a sneak through the enemy territory mission, with the added bonus of having to deal with Borg attacks that are coming from behind you. Now I will say that the Romulan ships all look very similar, and it's not always easy to tell them apart. But I guess that's going to be an issue when you haven't really seen too many classes in the shows, so they had to make up stuff for the game. And they ended up not being quite as distinctive as, say, the Klingon vessels.
Engines.
But on the positive side, you don't have to hear them shouting at you every time you select a ship. They are far more polite.
You interrupt my research?
How may I serve?
And after all that cloak and dagger and having to be sneaky, they just ended up making a deal with the Borg anyway, and they tasked them with taking out the Klingons,
The enemy.
which they seem to do very badly. And it might not surprise anyone, but once the Klingons in the sector are finally taken care of, the Romulans break the deal, so you then have to fight the Borg as well. And, well, knowing that this was going to happen, I already built one of the Romulans' super weapons, as each race gets either a super weapon or building, and in this instance it's a ship that will explode, taking out the crew, but also dealing a lot of damage. I don't always find them all that useful, as a few fleets of ships can do far more damage in a much shorter amount of time. Or you can use the long-range attack craft that each race gets. They might be lightly shielded, but with a bunch of them, they can easily take out the weapon platforms, and from that point it's pretty easy to walk into an enemy base and take out the rest of it.
Your will.
Completing this then leads us on to the Borg chapters of the game, because who doesn't want to play as the baddies? And the first job of the collective is to take out some Dominion forces, as we need to assimilate a cloning facility. But to get to this point we will have to build up a fleet, as the days of a single cube being massively overpowered are long gone. Along with the collective barely having any other ship classes, because it seems every single race needs to have the same buildings and classes as everyone else. I guess it just makes the game simpler that way. The cubes are still quite powerful, more so if you upgrade them with the fast assimilation beam, but you will still be using a number of them to get any of the work done. I guess the Dominion War really upped everyone's firepower. But capturing the cloning facility means the Borg can bring back Locutus of Borg.
Primary objective, obtain Particle 010.
I will comply.
As after being outwitted by the Romulans, the Borg needed someone or something special to help them get the Omega particle. And that is our next target. In what looks like a pretty large map, but you end up playing on a very tiny part, as you have to assimilate your way to victory. And even with the cube's hold and assimilate beam, it isn't all that easy, as the moment they flip sides is also the moment where they can easily be taken out by someone sneezing in the next galaxy. And you'll also have to wait for your drone count to increase so you can re-drone your ships. And that happens very slowly for the Borg. In fact, just about everything happens slowly for the Borg. I wonder if they went with Locutus as the Borg primary, just so they didn't have to hire another actor, as they did do a decent job of getting the cast together. We have Picard, Worf, Martok and Sela, all voiced by their original cast members, and all do a pretty good job as well. And with Omega captured, it's time for us to get it back to the Collective, which requires a transwarp conduit that can only be built in this area, and one that just so happens to have an aggressive amoeba-like species that can't be assimilated by the Borg. So the goal is simply to wipe them out and then build the gate. But what isn't so simple is the huge swarms of them that will attack if you go out exploring. Thankfully, they can't really destroy your ships, but they can kill off the drones that are inside. So this initial massive onslaught that I had to deal with was quite difficult, as I kept having to restock the crew on my main space station, and then just flood the area with as much defensive units as I could. And I have to say, I am quite impressed with how many units and weaponry were on screen at once. I hate to think how a 200 MHz Pentium 2 would handle this. Once you've dealt with these, you then have to take out the Hive ships. And wouldn't you know it, they are resistant to the regular weapons. So this is where the Diamond comes into play. This is like the other special ships that the other races have, as its main weapons come from the various research topics at the unique building. In this instance, we get this special beam weapon that will take down the shields and thus allow our other craft to finish it off. But these specials are different for each race. And with all that sorted, all that's left is to assimilate Earth. So let's get that done, which is pretty much a simple build a huge fleet and then take on the Federation. But it is nice that I can quickly take over some Sovereign class ships, and it's possible to build up almost an entire squadron of them with just what we took. And I do like the fact that they look a little bit Borgified when you take them over.
Assimilate this vessel. We will adapt. Federation vessel Enterprise has disengaged from battle. Federation vessel Enterprise has entered a temporal distortion at subjunction 803. State new objective.
And after we force the Enterprise to go into a time vortex, and then blow up Worf just for good measure,
all outgoes.
Shields failing.
Perhaps today is a good day to die.
I guess today was a good day to die. We then quickly take over Starfleet HQ, and then take over the rest of Earth. And with that, it's game over, right? We took over the Federation, the Borg won! It's all over, let's go home. Well, not quite, as the final 4 missions opens up in the middle of the selection. As the Enterprise comes out of its time vortex and is ready to take on the Borg. Our goal here is to save the Galaxy class that was trying to take Spock, who is here in name only, to a peace conference to try and get everyone to play nice again and help each other out. This is another escort mission, where the Borg will pop out of nebulas or use transwarp conduits to try and ambush you. It's not very Borg-like behaviour, though you now also have to deal with Borg diamonds that have this really nasty little attack that will make the HUD move around on its own. You can actually rearrange the HUD yourself, but when the Borg affect you, then well, it's just confusion abound for a little while. But it does give us a chance to mess around with a Galaxy class starship, as well as using some of the tricks on the Nebula class, like doubling a ship for a short amount of time. Complete this and you then get to take on that final Borg mission, but this time it's you protecting Earth, which is quite cool really, and after a while you get a fleet of ships to try and help you. Well, I say a fleet, it's just a few extra ships,
Armed and ready.
that mostly are just hero ships as well, so you probably want to move them out of the way. But it does mean that now you can trigger the Federation's own superweapon that stops time in a small area of the map. Then finally you have the last 2 missions that takes the fight back to the Borg in their space. and doing that gives you the full might of the Federation, Klingon and Romulans for the fight. And do that, and it's game over. And there we have it, a longer than expected look at Star Trek Armada. And we've not even touched on the multiplayer aspect or the quick missions that it also provides, but they are there for those that enjoy it. At the time this was quite the game, as I think it was the first and one of the few Star Trek RTS games. Yeah, the AI could get a little bit confused with its pathfinding, and it didn't even review all that well. Mostly because at the time there was a lot of RTS games coming out, and for the most part this didn't add enough new to set it apart. But I still find it a lot of fun and actually quite unique. And if it looked quite interesting, then you are in luck, as you can get it off places like GOG, where it's been tweaked to run on modern operating systems. There was something special about being able to build the most powerful vessels in the Star Trek universe and have them battle it out against each other. And if you'll excuse me, I've got to build a few more Negvars and Sovereign class ships. So until next time, I've been the Goldfish, that was not a good day to die, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching me play with these ships, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, then consider sending some crew to activate the buttons below, as it really helps the channel unlock new weapons in its fight against the Borg. Or you might even try changing the hailing frequencies to check out some of the other videos you can see on the screen right now.
Enemy engaged.